So it wasn't until about my sophomore year of college when I moved into my own apartment for the first time that I really started cooking for myself. And back then, when I wasn't making Kraft mac and cheese, my go-to meal was chicken and rice. But not like good chicken and rice. We're talking throw some plain white rice in a rice cooker, plop down some chicken breasts, slap on a few generic seasonings, and toss them in the oven. And if I was really feeling it, I might even steam up some plain broccoli to go with it. So it wasn't exactly an amazing meal, but when topped with enough hot sauce, it was actually, it still wasn't very good. Even with hot sauce, it wasn't great. But that's what I ate. Until one day when strolling through my local bookstore, I came across a book called Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat. And it would be a massive understatement to say that from that point forward, my life was forever changed. Now, many of you are probably familiar with this book, but for me at the time, it was a complete game changer. It helped me realize that cooking isn't about recipes. It's about understanding principles that apply across a wide variety of dishes. And most of those principles are actually pretty easy to master once you're aware of them. So fast forward a few years later, and now I'm making a variety of delicious chicken and rice dishes, among many other things. And believe it or not, the difference between where I am today versus where I started can be broken down into a few simple concepts, which by the way, anyone can learn and apply right away. Now these days, one of my go-to dishes is this chicken shawarma and Lebanese rice. I make it pretty much every week, so needless to say, it's one of my favorites. And it's a great dish for practicing a bunch of basic cooking concepts that can be applied to nearly anything you cook. So to make it, the first thing we need to do is prepare our chicken. And in this case, I'm using chicken breasts, but you could also use thighs if that's what you prefer. So I'll cut them into 3 relatively equal sized pieces by first cutting off the thinner pointy end and then cutting the remaining thicker portion in half horizontally. Then I'll just pound them all out to a uniform thickness, in this case about a ½ inch. So that's actually my first tip, to pound out your meat to a uniform thickness to ensure that it cooks evenly throughout. And this is especially important when it comes to leaner cuts like chicken breasts because they can dry out very quickly when overcooked. So if it's not pounded to an even thickness, you'll often end up with one side overcooked while the other remains at a nice medium rare. Bon appetit! I'm kidding, by the way, please don't eat medium rare chicken. Anyways, once the chicken is pounded, we'll season it generously with salt. And that already brings us to the next tip, which is to season your meat in advance whenever possible. As we learn in Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat, by salting the meat in advance, we give the salt time to diffuse throughout the meat, ensuring that it's perfectly seasoned all throughout. And not only that, but the salt helps to break down the proteins in the meat, allowing it to retain moisture better as it cooks and to end up more tender and juicy. But we can really take this chicken to the next level by adding one more step, which is to marinate it with some slightly acidic ingredients along with some spices. So in this case, we're gonna start with a 1/4 cup of Greek yogurt plus a tablespoon of fresh lemon juice, both of which will provide some nice acidity. Then from there, we'll add 2 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil, 1 tablespoon of ground coriander seeds, 1 teaspoon of ground cumin seeds, 1 teaspoon of ground black peppercorns, 1 teaspoon of smoked paprika, 1/2 teaspoon of ground turmeric, and 4 cloves of grated or finely minced garlic. And again, this is really just a basic template, so you can easily switch up the spices or the sources of acidity to create different flavor profiles. But anyways, once we've thoroughly coated our chicken with the marinade, we'll cover it and let it rest in the refrigerator for anywhere between 1 and 12 hours. But if you do happen to be in a rush, you can just let it rest at room temperature for an hour or less, and that'll still be better than nothing. But now as we're waiting for the chicken to marinate, let's talk rice. And by the way, I'm actually coming out with a super deep dive video on rice dishes next week, so keep an eye out for that, but we'll just get into the basics here. So for this recipe, I'm using basmati rice, and my first tip here is to thoroughly rinse your rice until the water runs clear. The reason being that the surface of your rice contains a ton of starch, and when cooked, that starch will cause the rice to become sticky and clumpy. And especially in this recipe, we want our rice to remain pretty light and grainy. So when it comes to actually cooking the rice, we're not just gonna combine water and rice like the old Charlie would have done. This time, we're gonna start by toasting the rice to incorporate some additional flavor. So I'm gonna heat a pot over medium-high heat, and then add 3 tablespoons of olive oil, along with 3 tablespoons of vermicelli or cut spaghetti pasta, plus a pinch of salt. Then I'll toast that until the noodles turn a nice golden brown color, at which point I'll add a pinch of cinnamon and a few cranks of black pepper. So adding just a little bit of spice here goes a long way because oil is extremely efficient at absorbing flavors and distributing them throughout the dish. So basically what we did here was create a warm, toasty flavor base before we even added the rice. But now we can finally go ahead and add it, along with another pinch of salt. And to put on the finishing touch, we'll just toast the rice as well for about 30 seconds, being sure to stir constantly to coat all of the grains in that flavorful oil. And now it's finally time to add the water. And here's where a lot of people commit the biggest rice making sin, which is simply to add too much water. If you've ever had your rice come out more mushy and gooey than you like, it's almost certainly because you added too much water. So in this case, I'm adding just about 1¼ parts water for every 1 part rice, or in this case, for every 1 part of rice and pasta combined. Now, this isn't a universal ratio because it depends on what type of rice you're using, but generally for every 1 part of rice, you'll want to use anywhere between 1 to 2 parts water. And it all just depends on whether you want your rice to end up more grainy like we do in this case, or more sticky like when you're making jasmine rice or sushi rice. But either way, by this point we've done all of the hard work of developing flavor and complexity in the rice. And now we just have to let it cook as we normally would. So for basmati rice, that means first bringing the pot up to a boil, then I'll stir it and reduce the heat to low, then cover the pot and let it simmer for about 16 minutes. Then I'll remove the pot from the heat, still covered, and let it steam for about another 5 minutes off of the heat. After which point I'll fluff it with a fork or a spoon and add more salt as necessary, then set it aside until I'm ready to serve it. Now in the meantime, we can make our chicken, and I usually get this started when the rice is almost done because it really doesn't take too long to cook. And if you ask me, the key to great chicken in almost all cases is to sear it. And not only that, but you need to sear at the proper temperature and use the right type of pan. You see, the whole goal of searing is to create that beautiful and delicious browning on the surface of the meat. And that browning is created by something called the Maillard reaction, which occurs most rapidly at temperatures above about 300 degrees Fahrenheit or 150 degrees Celsius. So to make sure we reach those temperatures and maintain them, we need to sear over a pretty high heat. And we also need to use a heavy pan with good heat retention, like cast iron or stainless steel, so that it won't cool down significantly when we add food to it. So in this case, I'm using cast iron, and you'll also notice that I've added a bit of neutral oil to the pan. And that'll just help to transfer heat even more efficiently and to provide some extra flavor and richness. So that's not something you really need to add when you're searing fattier cuts of meat, but lean cuts like this chicken breast will definitely benefit from it. Now it's only going to take about 2 to 3 minutes per side, and you'll know your chicken is done when it reaches an internal temperature of between 160 and 165 degrees Fahrenheit or about 73 degrees Celsius, and the chicken is nicely charred on both sides. So it might not be easy at first to achieve the right balance between a charred exterior and a perfectly cooked interior, but with some time and practice, you'll start to build an intuition for it. Now if we compare this method to our oven baked chicken, we can quickly see why I prefer searing. Because when you bake, the chicken is basically just being heated by air, and air just simply isn't as efficient at transferring heat as a metal pan, or even the oil within your pan. Now one exception is when you're cooking skin on chicken, because the chicken skin does contain some fat that will render out as it cooks, and in turn it'll cook the chicken more efficiently. But even in that case, I still like to give the chicken a quick sear before I bake it. But now we can't have chicken shawarma without a sauce, and for that we have a few options. First, you could literally just serve it with some plain Greek yogurt, which is just tangy enough to nicely complement the chicken and rice and to elevate it to the next level. But what I prefer even more is to combine that yogurt with just a bit of lemon juice. In this case, about 2 tablespoons of lemon juice to 1/2 cup of yogurt. And this just takes the acidity up one more notch, which for my taste, I really like. But from here, you can take it even further by adding some spices and herbs. So in my case, I'm just adding 1 clove of grated garlic and about a tablespoon of chopped parsley, and then seasoning the sauce to taste with salt and pepper. So that sauce is super simple, but this dish is also great served with garlic sauce and pita bread, or my personal favorite, which is hummus. And conveniently, I have a great hummus recipe on my channel, so you can click here to check that out. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you over there.